How are you feeling in general?
Emotionally?
No, physically.
Physically?
I don't care about emotionally.
Physically, fine. Achy. A little bit achy. But I think that's linked to tiredness. I feel like when your sleep's out of whack. Yeah. And also, I haven't eaten that great recently. And I just had a big hearty meal, and I'm hoping that's going to sort me out.
Okay. Have you had your test results back yet?
Yeah, negative.
Negative. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Corridor of Uncertainty, the top step. So a few housekeeping things to address right off the bat. We've got a new name, the top step. We've swapped chairs. Jonny is wearing a horrible jumper.
It's a beautiful jumper.
But this will all make sense very shortly because this is going to be the series where we talk about F1. Now, there's a lot to get our teeth into in this series because we're about to embark on probably, you would say, Jonny, the biggest changes in F1 history?
That is what's being said, yeah. These are the biggest regulation changes in the history of the sport, which is extremely exciting, but also very complicated. The way that F1 works, I guess, as an overview, is that every 5 or 6 years, they do big sweeping rule changes. The idea is to sort of keep the competition fresh, to keep the sport moving forward, to kind of a picture emerges at the end of a rule cycle. And strangely enough, what often happens is actually it gets quite interesting at the end of a rule cycle because the field converges, all the teams work on the cars to the point where they're quite similar in pace. And then the rule changes come in and everything's really exciting, but usually you get a massive field spread again, which is something that we'll probably touch on, which is quite possible. But yeah, so with these new regulations, the big changes is, sort of going from what you'd see as an aerodynamic formula, the previous formula, the formula being like the rule set, that's kind of what that means. And Formula One meaning it's the pinnacle of motorsport, so the top formula you can do to make a car, basically. And previously it was very aerodynamically focused, a thing called ground effect, which is basically having the cars hug the ground so that you could take corners at great speeds. But straight line speed and engine performance wasn't really the main director of performance. Whereas now that's completely different. Engines are going to be huge. It's a 50-50 split between sort of like the hybrid power and the petrol power. So they're trying to basically harness more electricity. The reason for that is global warming is a thing, despite what some world leaders will tell you. And it causes problems with sort of like, it's a global circus. F1 travels around the world. So they're trying to get to, I think they're trying to do net zero at some point. So carbon neutral is something that F1 struggled with quite a lot. So they're trying to get towards that. And that will therefore attract new manufacturers in, which, as we'll get onto, it has done. So we've actually got more cars on the track, which I suppose is a good thing.
I think the first question that's sprung to mind there when you say that because we're moving more towards a 50-50 split, or we are moving towards a 50-50 split, that means that the engine matters more?
The engine matters a lot more.
Could you explain that to a layman? Is it because the fuel itself matters less, which is the same for everyone?
Well, when you say engine, what I suppose you really mean is power unit. That's what they're calling them, right? Because it's a split, because it's a 50-50 split between engine and electrical energy, so it's a pure hybrid. It isn't really an engine, really, at that point. So manufacturers of road cars, generally speaking, are making hybrid cars and electrical cars when they look to the future. So they want to pour their technological resources into a sport that's going to give them work in simpatico with what they're doing on the road. Because if they're making petrol engines, they'll say, well, what's the point in making the highest quality petrol engines for the sport, as Ben leaves the house, where in their actual manufacturing process, they're making electric hybrid engines. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work together. So they can pour all that resource into the engines, the power units, sorry.
It's worth mentioning that obviously you are, and me and most of the F1 media landscape don't really know what's going to happen.
Exactly. It's kind of finding out, because saying that the engines are going to make all the difference, yes, they're going to make a huge amount of difference. but also little technological advances. So we've seen, for example, in pre-season testing, that Ferrari's rear wings are flipping upside down.
On purpose?
Yes. So that on the straights, they're going to have a thing. So DRS is gone. DRS, which is where the flap sort of opens up, that has been done away with. The rear flap has been done away with, to be replaced with something called active aero. So your front wing flaps, your rear wing flaps, they're all going to be flapping about the place on the straight. And what you want to do is create as little drag as possible so that the air is kind of firing through the car and not meeting any resistance. But then when you get to a braking zone, you want the opposite. And this has been like a common trade-off in F1 performance, is that how much do you focus on straight line speed, which is where you have low drag and the air is flying through the crevices in the car. But then when you brake, you want to be stopping as fast as possible. So suddenly you want, and you'll see it on a lot of supercars, the Bugatti Veyron's quite a common example of that, where on the straights you've got a rear wing that's kind of open and letting air through, and then suddenly it'll kind of rake up and create this barrier spoiler thing, so the air is suddenly pushing against it and slowing it down. And that has replaced DRS, so they're going to have active aero. So aero is still going to make a difference, just in a different way. And I think the hunt for straight line speed, which of course power unit performance will lend to that, is going to be the key to unlocking this formula.
Right, I was listening to that, I promise, but I'm slightly I'm having teething problems with this side of the
What
corridor.
issues have you found with
I just can't really stretch my leg out in the way. I think it's because of this contraption we've made, which is
to support Max Verstappen
box
being
on top of a backpack, on top of a bin, on top of Max Verstappen. One very simple, smooth-brained question that popped into my head when listening to that was, is it going to be faster or slower? Very simply. Oh, it's just he's taking.
It's really warm. I just wanted to get him in there.
Yeah, Jonny's a massive Verstappen fan. We should probably lay that out there.
I'm going to try. Yeah, he's kind of dominating proceedings, isn't he? But I'm going to try and be as not biased as possible. There we go. There's my that's my daddy. I love
her.
Yeah. Right, where should I put this that it won't be I'll just chuck him over there. Sorry, Max.
Oh, perfect throw. Yeah, so obviously we had
slower.
Maybe one or it will be slower.
It will be slower.
It will be slower.
It will be slower at first. And there was worries that it was going to be really slow. That because of the lack of aerodynamic performance, and also the way they're recharging the batteries, because they have to get as much electrical energy on the straights, they're going to have to be recharging through corners. Fine for slow speed corners because you're going slowly, but if you're going through fast speed corners and changing down a gear and saving energy and not, even going full throttle is possible through a fast corner where normally you'd be flat out, means that you're going to lose time there. But the early signs from testing is that they're not that far off. And usually when a rule set changes, there is a couple of seconds lost and they make that back up, usually. I mean, they'll never make it back up to the extent of the early 2020s when, 2019 to 2021, where the cars were ridiculously fast.
You explained that to me in that, that's just what they said, just go out there and make the fastest car, which kind of, I think, for people like me was like, well, isn't that what they're always trying to do?
Yeah, so it's a delicate balance between nostalgia, what the fans want. Liberty Media, who now run the sport, have really put a focus on entertainment. They see it as an entertainment sport. So they want wheel-to-wheel racing. They want close, interesting races where you can overtake. A big thing, and you will see, similar to cricket in a way, but in more sort of technological jargon, there's so many words in Formula One that you just go, what? What does that mean? So dirty air, for example, is when you're in the wake of the aerodynamic performance of the car in front. On the straights, they're punching a hole through the air, nice little slipstream for you to go into, speeds you up. Like on Mario Kart, when you're behind a car and then you...
No, that I understand.
We'll always try and put it in Mario Kart terms. That happens, but then through the corners, you get the opposite effect. Because of the aerodynamic kind of overspill, the air is not as clean, it's more dirty, hence the term dirty air, which means the cars sort of slide through the corners, they lose grip, they lose tyre performance, they lose temperature. All in all, that's a bad thing. So yes, flat out, those 2020 cars around the qualifying lap were the fastest we've ever seen. Stick them behind a car and they're nowhere near as fast as what they should be this year. So that's the trade-off. Do you know what I mean? So in a vacuum, making the fastest Formula One car possible is actually, in a race trim, sometimes slower.
That is very interesting. So I think naturally with the fact that we've not seen these cars race yet, the potential issues have swam more to the top, and that's why we sort of mentioned them off the bat. One other thing to mention in regards to that is you've said to me about how it's going to be, probably favourable to the sim racing generation, you called it, and that, 3 titans of the sport may end up walking away if this doesn't work out for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting going to a season where we've got 3 world champions who, for very, very different reasons, having their futures questioned a lot, and I'll get onto that. You also mentioned the sim racing generation. So because of the way they need to save electrical energy, there's going to be a lot of pressing buttons on the steering wheel. And if you look at an F1 steering wheel, it's already extremely nuanced, and there's a lot going on. There's a button to radio your engineer, there's a button to say you're coming into the pits, there's your gear flaps to change gear, the pedals. There's various brake biases and setup changes you can make just by pressing buttons on the car, and it looks like a gamepad. It looks like you're holding a Nintendo Switch in the car, basically. And that's going to go berserk now because they've got to save electrical energy. They've got those aerodynamic active aero things. They're going to be able to affect that. There's, deployment of energy, overtake mode, boost mode. There's so much going on. I'm going to take a while to get my head around it, to be honest. And I think a lot of the sort of F1 world will. And that somewhat links into some of those drivers. And the 3 that are kind of coming up a lot are Fernando Alonso, 2-time world champion, titan of the sport, who's now nearly 50 and still going and still one of the fastest guys out there. Lewis Hamilton, who is statistically the greatest of all time, has won the most championships, most races, most pole positions. And Max Verstappen, who's my GOAT and probably the best driver in the world at the moment. Verstappen, in theory, should really suit these regulations. He is the sim king. He's a reigning world sim racing champion, as well as being. He took that sim racing ability to race it in GT cars, raced the thing in real life based on his sim experience, and won it. So you could say that, in theory, Verstappen's abilities are kind of directly translational from the sim to the sport, which is quite rare. So he should get his head around this very quickly, and the early signs are that he absolutely has. So in testing, he was pioneering an approach to corners where he was spamming down the gears through the corner, which would give a sharp input of electrical energy. So he was getting to a corner, and rather than smoothly going boom, 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 he was going boom, 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 which punched electrical energy through the car. And everyone else was like, we've never seen that done before. And he was just on it straight away. But he then came out and said, yeah, I've invented a new way of driving. It's the fastest way to do it. I hate it. It's not driving. It's not pure. I'm only doing it because it's fast. And if these regulations continue to be as bad, I will walk away. He's not making idle threats. Some people in sport will say things like that and not do it. But I really do get the sense with Max Verstappen is that he came into F1 wanting to win a world championship. He's won 4. He's already cemented himself as one of the greats. He has a kid now with his girlfriend, Kelly Piquet. He also kind of acts as a father figure to her, child that she had with another F1 driver who he took the seat of. Do you know this story? Danny Kvyat, who got dropped from Red Bull, replaced by Verstappen, dumped by his girlfriend, who then went out with Verstappen, and his child he no longer has contact with because Max Verstappen is looking after the child. So that's a whole other thing. There's a lot of off-the-track drama in Formula One, which the Drives to Survive era has lent itself into. So there's a possibility that he could walk away because he doesn't enjoy driving it. Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso are slightly different. Alonso's is tied to car performance. We'll get into Aston Martin, but it's not looking good. He's at Aston Martin, and he has a bit of a career knack for career decisions that don't work out, and it looks like this one hasn't either. And then Lewis Hamilton's is more tied to his own performance, and if he's not really able to match Charles Leclerc this year, then there'll be question marks about his ability to continue in the sport, I would say. So all 3 of those question marks. So
we've started quite on a bit of a down note, I would say, in this, and it's not just because you've been up since 3 a.m.
Yeah, I'm quite groggy at the moment.
Yeah, and that I've got a 1 beer mini hangover. It's just the fact that I think it's natural that there's so many unknowns it's easy for us to more easily understand what could go wrong, I think. But surely there is, potential, as it says in this document, which you made for me. Thank you.
I made a
It feels
doc.
nice to receive one. Potential intrigue. It doesn't say that. Potential intrigue / excitement with the regs.
Yeah.
Can you think of any?
I'm really excited. I'm
Nice.
really, really excited going into this. And I know it's been a bit doom and gloom because the drivers have been quite doom and gloom, mainly from like a drivability point of view and not enjoying it. And some of the risks, down changing through the corners, that's not Formula One. But that's really exciting because we've never seen it before. And there's potential. There was a practice start in the Bahrain test where Lewis Hamilton started 9th. And because of the way that they deploy the turbo, the Ferrari was first by the second corner.
Oh, that is very Mario Kart.
That's very Mario Kart.
You might be like people qualifying in 10th on purpose and then shooting to the front.
Exactly. And that's just something that you don't see, the bullet bill, if you will. You stay in last and you get an item box and you shoot to the front. Maybe the turbo could be beneficial to do that. And seeing how these are drivers we often look and compare drivers in terms of outright pace. And the debate will be, that's how it should be. This is Formula One, the pinnacle of motorsport. But what we're now going to see is a test of their adaptability. So the question of who is the best driver is going to move away from who is the fastest over a race stint and move into who can juggle lots of things at once, which is going to be very interesting. And I think as much as the great unknown, certainly in a sport where mechanical performance is so important and cars break down, right? But that's also why it's so exciting because anything can happen and we don't know yet.
Maybe we'll see an influx of drivers who are just like twats in BMWs on the M1 who are like on a Bluetooth headset and smoking a cigarette and like shouting at their kids. And,
the new generation of Formula One drivers.
They're just so good at driving, multitasking. That,
phone in that one hand. Yeah.
So the only reason that we know any of this stuff, or that Jonny does, is because of a thing called testing.
Yes.
Where all the teams get together on tracks and they, put their hard work on display for us. The first one was hidden, wasn't it? And then the cameras came in.
Yeah.
All we've got to go off really so far is testing, and it's been absolutely fascinating, what I've seen anyway. What are your takeaways from the testing we've had so far?
Yeah, you mentioned the Barcelona test then, and that's not really supposed to happen. What happened was the teams got together and sort of said, we're not ready for this, and we're a bit nervous, and we don't want... Oh,
someone's at the door.
Someone at the door.
Hold that thought.
Right, testing. So the teams basically pulled together and said, we need an extra test and we want to do it behind closed doors because we don't want the embarrassment of our cars all breaking down and everyone knowing about it. But so stupid because this is the modern age and people just find things out. So somebody found a way to hack into the live timing digitally. There were people around the track with cameras like shooting. So we found, and in the end, F1 just released the times and it wasn't as bad as expected. Lots of cars ran really well. Save for Williams, who didn't turn up, and save for Aston Martin, who rolled out of the garage on the last day with a very aggressive and cool-looking car that broke down after 4 laps and hasn't really run much since, but we'll talk about them in more depth. But yeah, the Bahrain test was really, really intriguing because we watched in live time drivers adapt to a regulation set that really... as we mentioned before, requires them to think outside the box in terms of their driving. So some of the highlight moments, Verstappen coming out and driving in completely different ways to what we've seen before. Ferrari's rear wing flipping upside down to provide less drag on the straights and more downforce in the corner. We've never really seen that before. So those starts where certain drivers, particularly the Ferraris, were just launching off the line and overtaking everyone. And another thing with the starts, they've changed the procedure because they actually need to charge the electrical energy on the grid to get them to move, which means rather than 5 lights coming on and away they go, they're going to have to sit on the grid for 10 seconds. And it sounds like, when 2 cats are like sussing each other out and they look like they're going to fight and they go... It's exactly like that. The noise I just made is the noise they're going to be making. So it's all very weird, and it points towards a lot of unknowns going forward. Another thing to mention with testing is something called sandbagging. Have you heard that term before?
If I had to guess, would it be teams, holding back to some extent to try and sort of disguise maybe developments that they'd made?
Bang on, Charlie. You're a natural. So it's a very common thing, but we've seen it go into overdrive this time round, whereby every team wants to point the finger at another team and say they are faster than us. Cars will be running detuned in those tests. They'll be fueled heavily, so over-fueled, so that they're not at their lightest and therefore don't go as quick. They won't be running the fastest tyres, and when they do run the fastest tyres, the drivers will be told to ease off a little bit. And there'll be lots of circumstances where a driver will do 2 fastest sector times, set the timings alight, and their team will radio and say, come into the pits, so we don't see the full performance. And then what you get, and we got a lot of this, particularly from Mercedes, which is interesting, pointing their finger at every other team saying, oh, we really like that innovation. Or Red Bull, they're 1 second a lap faster than us down the straights. They said that. Toto Wolff came out and said that. All that Ferrari aerodynamics look incredible. And then you've got George Russell giving those interviews saying everyone else is really fast. But he's grinning his little head off. And everyone knows that Mercedes, well, we expect that Mercedes are in a very strong position.
And would it be fair to say that part of the reason for that is the compression ratio saga?
Yes, Charlie.
I love
absolutely.
This document, makes me sound very clever. Now, I have read a little bit into this, but if I'm honest, it didn't make any sense. I think the most I've understood it so far is when you, in the kitchen downstairs, explained it to me a little bit a couple of weeks ago. So if you could do that again,
I'll try and do that again. So there's a rule called the compression ratio rule, which means that, and the rule is written as such, at an ambient temperature, the compression ratio must not exceed 16:1. What compression ratio means is basically the pistons entering the power unit, how far in are they getting? And the more they get in, the more friction they're creating, the more juice they get. I don't really understand it, but this is the best way I can get it across, is the more juice they're getting, the further in those pistons go to fire out electrical energy and just power output. There will be experts, engineers who can tell me why what I've just said is waffle, but this is the way I've had it explained to me by podcasters who are really into it and really into the Formula One circle, and say this is the most easy way to understand it. So that's the rule. At ambient temperature, 16:1, no better than that. But you don't race at ambient temperature.
And also, ambient temperature isn't a temperature.
No, it's just like, it's a general wishy-washy thing of like when the car is still in a room, I guess. So what some teams, and it was Red Bull and Mercedes who found this out, is that when running at a racing temperature, which is of course much hotter than an ambient temperature, they could get the compression ratio to be higher, even as high as 18-19:1 rather than 16:1, but still have it at an ambient temperature, whatever that means, be 16:1. So a loophole, basically, which F1's all about. It's all about finding gaps in the regulations to exploit car performance. That's bread and butter of what makes the sport so interesting. And it's said that compression ratio increase is worth between half a second and a second a lap. That might not sound a lot, but that's a huge amount in Formula One terms, when the difference between pole position and 10th last year was about 1/10 of a second. Huge amounts of difference. 0.2 of a second. But so it should make a huge difference. But the saga around that is the other engine manufacturers, aside from Red Bull and Mercedes, so Ferrari, Honda and Audi, basically came out saying, we don't like this. We don't think this is in the spirit of the rules. They appealed to the FIA, which is the governing body, and said we don't like it. And then there was a vote, or there was discussion about changing the rules, which obviously Mercedes didn't want to do because they'd found an advantage. And the big question was, what would Red Bull do? The thinking in the paddock is that they haven't exploited it to quite the level that Mercedes did, so they joined in with the other teams. And halfway through the season, that loophole is going to be closed. So basically, the thinking is Mercedes have half a year to steal a march before they're going to have to make changes. But it's not just that. Their car looks great. They have one driver who is ready to be a world champion in George Russell, one driver who has the future hallmarks of a world champion in Kimi Antonelli. They're a very well-run unit, and the last time that the regulations were as such that deployment of electrical energy was this important was in 2014 when Mercedes came out of the blocks and lapped most of the field in the first race and won by 30 seconds. So all of the things that we have so far point towards them being in the driving seat, if you will.
Very nice. Would you be able to quickly explain how Mercedes have had such a stinker in the last 4 years? Because, ever since, probably that post Schumacher few seasons when they first came into F1, they've been fairly dominant, or at least, the second fastest side at any point. So, what was it about the last 4 years that they found so difficult?
So another strange thing about F1 is, so all cars have testing facilities, simulators, and their car between 2022, which was when the last rules changed, and up to this point, was theoretically brilliant. And all the simulators suggested that they were going to be really quick and probably the fastest team. But what actually happened was that they had pioneered downforce to such an extent, and the last regulations was all about downforce, hoovering to the ground and sucking in that air. And they got so close to the ground that as they go down the straight, the car would start bouncing, which isn't very fast, isn't very comfortable. The drivers were getting backache. The car was bouncing all over the place and losing time. And then what they had to do then was pitch it up at a higher ride height. And Formula One is about very fine margins, as ChatGPT was telling us earlier. And when they started running it higher, all of the data, because they'd run it low in the simulator, thinking it would be fine, all of the data that they had suddenly went out the window, and they found that when running the car high, it just didn't have the performance, and they were nowhere. And they never really got their head around that. And it didn't suit Lewis Hamilton's driving style, so he left. And yeah, they just never really got the hang of it, really.
So sounds like they're back on track, or that's what we're looking at, and potentially, as you say, a little bit of sandbagging going on from them. Do you think that there's any chance on earth that we could be seeing ultra sandbagging from a certain team called Aston Martin? And the fact that they are pretty much unable to get out of the garage might be some big-brained move from Adrian Newey?
Yeah, we've designed the fastest car ever, and we just don't want anyone to see it on track at any point, and we don't need to do any mileage. Really worrying signs for Aston Martin.
What has gone so wrong, do you know?
You can only take kind of whispers, right? But Adrian Newey said that when he came into the team, because he joined from Red Bull, and there's a common gardening leave practice within F1. You can't just join another team because you can take all their plans with you. So what they do is the team that you leave gives you an amount of time where they feel that their development will have moved on and say, yeah, you can start then. And they gave him, it was a number of months, possibly a year, before Red Bull were happy for him to start work, which meant that he joined the process late. And Adrian Newey is a genius. We should probably say who Adrian Newey is. He's the greatest designer of all time. He's designed, I think, around 16 World Championship winning, 8 World Championship winning cars. And then when you factor in constructors and drivers, he's won about 16 World Championships. The greatest designer of all time, a genius, someone who reads a set of regulations, downloads them into his brain and sees templates of cars. And you see him walking around with his notebook with these little drawings that are beyond what anyone else can comprehend. He's a genius. So he basically said, because they've been pretty rubbish, Aston Martin anyway recently, wait for me. We'll be late because I'm having to wait for Red Bull. Wait for me. I'll come in. We'll choose a direction and we will go with it. That's the aerodynamic side. And yeah, that's a risk because you want as much data as possible. And it might be that Newey just didn't get it right, and that's possible. But the big question mark is on the power unit side. The thinking in Formula One about 3 years ago was that to win a world championship, you had to work with an engine manufacturer who was supplying you and only you, so you could build the car around it and focus on packaging that tightly. So, for example, Mercedes obviously run a Mercedes engine. Red Bull had a partnership with Honda. At the time, they were the only ones to have a partnership with Honda. So they were basically working in tandem to build a car together. Whereas your McLarens, your Williamses, they run a Mercedes engine. They get it secondhand. They don't get the fastest version. Same with Haas and Ferrari and various other teams throughout history. So Aston Martin, when Red Bull split up with Honda, because Honda pulled out of Formula One to make their own engines, so now Red Bull makes their own engines, Aston Martin convinced Honda to come back into the fold and ditched the Mercedes engine, crucially. It's now widely regarded that the Mercedes is the best engine. McLaren won the championship last year with a Mercedes engine. Aston Martin have ditched the Mercedes engine. The Honda program disbanded, shut down, and then they convinced them to come back, so they're behind. And now their power unit is not even able to do 4 laps.
Yeah, it seems like a massive sort of punch to your own face, really. I remember talking to you a couple of months ago about how I was quite excited for Aston Martin because of the Adrian Newey thing, and also obviously, you know, Stroll is Stroll, but you've got Alonso in there who's still doing great things. And then I specifically remember saying to you, and they run a Mercedes engine, don't they? So, and that seems like it's going to be the best
and
engine.
I said, yeah.
But apparently, no, they don't anymore. Are you able to shed any light on why the engine is so bad?
I mean, there are massive deja vu moments coming here because in 2014-15 kind of time, Fernando Alonso joined McLaren because he was excited by the fact that Honda had just joined McLaren as the only supplier to them. And I think his best finish in his 3-year stint there was 5th in that time, and that was a shock result. It was awful. They were the slowest car by a long way. There was a lot of finger pointing. McLaren said, no, it's the Honda's fault. Honda said, no, it's McLaren's fault. We're seeing that all over again at Aston Martin. And it's Honda again. And it's Fernando Alonso again. He must think, what have I got to do, man? And yeah, so Honda are saying that the Aston Martin's design is too aggressive to properly facilitate their engine. Aston Martin are saying, no, build us a fast engine. We've got Adrian Newey. How can you doubt our aerodynamic performance? And I just think those two things have got to work so in simpatico. And the thing about Red Bull, strangely enough, Honda went to Red Bull after McLaren, where Adrian Newey was at the time. And I just think gave Honda a lot more freedom, put less pressure on them, said, yeah, we're going to take a few years of being quite slow. And they weren't really. And Honda used their knowledge from McLaren era to turn out some of the greatest F1 cars, certainly in the case of the 2023 season, the most dominant Formula One car that anyone's ever seen, in the hands of Max Verstappen. I'm not convinced that anyone else would have got that performance out of it, but I'm biased. So
they won pretty much every race, didn't they? Perez got a couple, which probably suggests that the car was pretty spectacular. No offense to Perez, but like if it's hoovering up pretty much all the races,
it must have been quite a good car, yeah. So Perez won 2 races that season. Verstappen won 18 races that season, I think it was, or 19, and Carlos Sainz won 1. So well done,
good
Carlos.
Effort, Carlos.
So yeah, I mean, why? I mean, there's, as ever with F1, there's so many different reasons, and different people within the same team will tell you that it's a different reason. The fact is, the engine's not very quick in a straight line. It's not very reliable. The aerodynamics are really aggressive, and the potential in that car, a lot of people agree, is quite high from an aerodynamic point of view. It's Adrian Newey, and it looks really cool. But if you go that aggressive, and you're not working in simpatico with your power unit manufacturer, you get this situation.
So that's testing, and that's already fascinating to me. Anyway.
I'm glad it is it? Because there's a lot of words. There's a lot of long words.
No, I think it's really interesting, but obviously we can't live in the theoretical world forever, and it's about to get real and hit the fan, and it's going to do so in Australia.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about the circuit there and what we're expecting and how you think that might affect these new cars and who's going to be the early front runners?
Yeah, so Australia is a part-time circuit. It's a half and half street circuit. You've got some things that are specifically built to be a track, but it basically runs through Albert Park in Melbourne, which is just a very lovely looking place with lakes and various restaurants. One of my favourite YouTubers, Mr. V, did a video which is, if you were trapped in the inner field perimeter of every track in the world, which one would be the best and where would you die? So he had a category tier list, which was, this would be better than my own life and you would definitely die. Albert Park, he put in better than my own life because there are paddle courts, there are beautiful restaurants, you're in a park, you've got a lake that you can go yachting on. It's just a dream. What does that mean for the actual sport, though? Well, because it's through a park, there's not many tight corners, really. It's quite a blast through Albert Park, which is going to be very intriguing for electrical management because to generate energy, you need some real force going through the car. When does force go through the car? It's under braking, which generates electrical energy through kinetic energy, and then you can deploy that down the straights. But if it's all straights, where are you developing energy? Where are you getting that from? There's only one heavy corner, heavy braking zone, which is turn 3. Other than that, you're full throttle for a lot of the lap. So there's talk that through some quite high-speed corners, and maybe even on the straights, we're going to be seeing drivers lifting off the throttle, changing down. Very counterproductive. Again, that's going to speak to adaptability, because you're ingrained as a racing driver to try and take as much risk through high-speed corners as possible. It's their favourite thing to do. It's what they live for. And suddenly they're going to be changing down, slowing down. It's going to be very interesting to see. Which points towards, and the team that has displayed the most ability to, under difficult circumstances, still deploy a lot of electrical energy is Red Bull. We don't know how much that was smoke and mirrors from Russell and Toto Wolff. They were the cheerleaders saying, oh, it's majestic what Red Bull are doing. They're generating energy from places we can't do. Verstappen's changing down technique is unbelievable, and I don't think we've got our heads around it. They're going to be really fast in Melbourne. I think Mercedes will be really fast in Melbourne. I just think, Red Bull are finding ways to get energy, but if you've got the fastest power unit, which I think Mercedes do, then I think they'll be really quick. So I'd be very surprised if we didn't see Mercedes with an advantage at Melbourne. But I do think that it's a track with an element of differential. If my prediction was that across the season Mercedes is going to be too powerful, if there's going to be a track where that gap's going to close, Melbourne's one of them. So that's fun.
And just to tie up one last thing that we were looking at in the testing section, are Aston Martin going to finish this race?
No.
No.
I don't think so. I mean, you're very rare. I'm not so sure. It's very rare that you see a testing program where a car completes like a handful of laps and then suddenly is able to go a race distance without breaking down. There's some talk that they won't even start. That's how bad it is. There's talk that they will do the formation lap, gather data there, but actually deem it to be detrimental to their season, because you can only have a certain amount of power units before you start getting grid penalties. It used to be 4. I need to check what it is now. But if you break down enough times, then you've got to get new power unit parts. That's usually get to the back of the grid for the next race. And there's talk, this is all conjecture, that they're going to save the engine and not bother.
Wow.
That's how bad it is. So there we go.
So that's our predictions for the first race, Australia, but there is many more races beyond that.
Many more.
Comprising a season, as it's commonly known. Yes. So let's do some predictions for the whole season, starting with who's going to surprise us. I mean, this is quite open-ended, you've left this, so this could be good or bad.
This could be good or bad. This could be team or driver. I'll just rattle off a few. Haas have been probably the minnow surprise of testing. They completed the second most amount of laps behind Mercedes, and usually the barometer for testing ability and performance is how many laps did you do, because that's the more data you get and the more reliable your car is, and they're not really going for lap time at that point. And they can definitely harness theoretical lap time out of a data set. So they've got a chap called Ollie Behrman, who's a young British chap who stepped into his debut in the, I think it was the Las Vegas Grand Prix, maybe Singapore actually. Singapore Grand Prix for Ferrari, when Carlos Sainz, I think, either got coronavirus or came down ill, and he stepped in and came 7th, which in your debut in a Ferrari, last minute, is very impressive. And he joined Haas, which is kind of the Ferrari B team last year, and outperformed a very seasoned and very respectable competitor in Esteban Ocon. So he looks good. I think he's going to have a really good season. I think he's going to kick on. I think he's going to surprise us by being possibly the standout young driver, let's say. Not a rookie anymore, but I think he's going to be a standout young driver. So I think Haas generally. Alpine, I think, are going to be strong. The Mercedes engine is a reason for that. I can see Pierre Gasly being best of the rest quite often. There is a lot of talk and agreement within the sport that the top 4 teams, which is McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, who have by far the largest budgets. There's a budget cap, but there's ways around budget caps, let's be honest. And they've got the most personnel. They've got the most sort of learned experience from their history of being the richest teams. And budget caps, they control how much money you can pump in, but they don't control infrastructure. They don't control assets. So they have a gap. And the talk is that then there's going to be about a second back to the rest. and the rest is probably going to be headed up by Alpine and Haas. And that was really in terms of surprise, it was who was going to jump forward. And Alpine were the slowest team last year. They won't be this year. I can say that categorically because Aston Martin, and we haven't spoken about Cadillac that much as well, which is a brand new team. Just quickly, place low expectations on them. Starting a Formula One team from scratch is very difficult. Expect them to be the slowest car. But if they finish the race, they'll probably beat Aston Martin, which to them will be a positive. And we were joking about they've got Perez and Bottas, who are like the two number twos that are just going to be letting each other pass every lap. After you, not after you. So that could slow them down a bit. But I think they will surprise us from the point of view of they'll finish. They won't, therefore, be the last team. I'd be very surprised if Aston Martin finished that race, and for Cadillac to come into Formula One and finish the race and therefore not be 21st and 22nd, that's a surprise. That's a real positive. Ferrari are looking good, but the thing with Ferrari, they always look good in tests and they never look good in seasons. So watch this space. I have a sneaking suspicion this is going to be Lewis Hamilton's final season. Actually, I'll just throw that one out there.
Big claim.
I think that's going to. I think he will probably call it quits if he can't match Charles Leclerc. So yeah, biggest surprises: Ollie Behrman and Haas, Pierre Gasly and Alpine, and a little nod to Cadillac as well.
Just if I could shoehorn something in here, and apologies if I'm sure you'd figured out where you were going to put this in.
I probably
in the running order, but if we've mentioned Cadillac, could we just quickly mention Audi as well? They're the second new team.
Yeah, Audi are coming at it with a bit more of a head start, a running start, than Cadillac, who are just starting from the ground up, brand new team. Audi have taken over the existing Sauber team, which last year was called the Kick Sauber, sponsored by Kick. And
from an aesthetic point of view, I'm happy to see them go on with their bright green car that's sponsored by a streaming service. And Audi's car looks really sleek and clean,
much
as does
nicer.
Cadillac. So from a purely aesthetic basis, which is half of my knowledge of the sport, I'm very happy to see this
Kick
change.
go.
But in a racing perspective,
they should be quicker in the long run. Audi's a huge company. They've got a great motorsport heritage, rallying mainly, and I think a bit of endurance as well. They should kick on at some point, but again, early days. It's their first power unit. It's their first time building an engine, a power unit for Formula One, and it's going to take time. So I'd expect predictions back of the grid. Aston Martin improving rapidly throughout the season because they should and they will. Cadillac, over the long haul, will be the slowest car with the least potential. And then you've probably got Williams and Audi. Williams have messed it up. They didn't get to the test on time. They've put all their eggs in the 2026 basket. It hasn't worked out by the looks of things. The car's massively overweight. And the reason for that is because their structures are still dated. They're a classic team that have been around for a while, and they were family run, and they're only just bringing themselves into the modern era. So everything they do is slower, therefore the car is overweight and it's not really ready. And then you're going to have, I think, as I mentioned, your Haas's and your Alpines and your Racing Bulls fighting for the best of the rest, and then obviously the top four. So Audi, I think they'd take bottom of the midfield, I would say.
right. So in terms of who's going to underwhelm, you've said that you think, well, Cadillac won't necessarily underwhelm. You said Williams.
Yeah.
Williams
will
probably
underwhelm.
Put in that category. So
Yes.
who else is underwhelming? And remember, this is all relative, so it could be McLaren, maybe.
McLaren, just what I was going to say, I think they'll be the fourth fastest team.
Right.
And obviously they were by far the fastest team last year. It's a miracle that they were ran so close to the title, but there was a genius driving the Red Bull. I think they'll be the fourth fastest car. If I was to predict the Melbourne pecking order, I'd have Mercedes, and then I'd have Red Bull and Ferrari really close, and McLaren just in behind. So I suppose you could say that's disappointing to go from the fastest car to the fourth fastest car. But I think when the fastest power unit is the one that you get secondhand from another team, you're on the back foot. And it was the brilliance of the McLaren Aero package that made them fast last year. Aero package is not the importance anymore. So it makes sense that they wouldn't be as quick. So yeah, Williams I think would be the biggest certainly at the start of the season. And then I would go McLaren as well.
And in terms of most improved, we've already touched on Alpine and Haas looking great in pre-season, and also Aston Martin probably improving
throughout the season.
Is there anyone else that you would put in the most improved category?
It will be Alpine. I believe they'll go from the slowest car to the best of the rest. You could make a case for Ferrari because they were woeful last year. And I think because Ferrari is the biggest, the oldest, and the most successful and the most famous team, they should be doing a lot better than they always seem to recently. For a lot of last season, they were the fourth fastest team. A lot of pundits are having them as the second fastest team going into the new season. We don't really know. But that's a decent improvement. And I think to improve at the front is much more difficult than it is at the back. So I think you'll see a leap from Alpine. And then I think Ferrari could even gain the same amount of time on last year, comparatively. But because they're against such classy operators, it might not translate into actual performance. So I'd go with those two.
Yeah, it's interesting with the... I think there are a lot of parallels to be drawn with English football's kind of infrastructure and probably Man United and Ferrari quite closely.
I was thinking that as I was saying it. Do I say they're the Man United of Formula One? I mean, they absolutely are. The sleeping giant.
But yeah, and I think that, it's like... Maybe, to be fair, United did nearly get relegated last season, but in general, it's kind of like the clubs of that stature, even to finish sixth is a mini disaster.
Yes.
But then to climb even one place up there is so difficult.
Yes.
Compared to going, from 17th to 12th in a season, it can just happen.
That's a very, very shrewd comparison, Charlie.
Thank you. From that shrewd comparison to what is just written down here as floppy team. Could you shed some light on that for me, please, Jonny?
I've already said it, really. I think Williams are the floppy team and Aston Martin the floppy team. I think... I couldn't think of a way to put it, so I thought floppy team was the best way to do it. Well, it's obviously Aston Martin, isn't it, from what we see? But I do expect them to make gains throughout the season. I think they will make rapid gains, actually. I think... the last few races of the season, they'll be scoring points pretty consistently. That's my prediction. But I think, they won't finish the first race and they'll struggle to finish the second race probably. So they're the floppy team out the gate. But I think across the season, I'm not going to call Cadillac the floppy team because well done for getting on the grid, well done for entering the sport with all the odds against you, building a car that's reliable. The Cadillac is running well. Building a car that, its outright pace ceiling is going to be the lowest and their development structure is going to be the weakest. But for them, there's something in Formula One called the 107% rule. So you have to get within 107% of the fastest time in qualifying to be allowed to start the race. For Cadillac, it's just about getting in that. And that's a good season for them if they can consistently do that. If they do that in every race, that's a good season, really. And I know that's setting the bar really low, but that's how difficult it is to come into Formula One.
That never really happens, does it? That rule being enacted? Is that just how close the grid is? Yeah,
so it has happened and then been done away with for like wet weather races where there's like a changeable qualifying where a team doesn't set a representative lap and they just go, it's situational. If it's what it is, it's to stop what happened in the 60s, 70s and to an extent 80s where teams who would turn up for one race, the British Grand Prix, a British guy in his shed would build a car and be allowed to enter the race, would be 30 seconds off the pace and would be allowed to race. And it's just dangerous. It's to stop that. But if like Cadillac, let's say, get within 0.5 of a second of that, they can put an appeal in and most likely they'll say, yeah, go on, you can race. So I don't think that will be strictly adhered to, but as like a theoretical benchmark, they've been saying 107%. If we're within that and we're racing within the regs, it's a bit embarrassing to race out of the regulations, go on, we'll do you a favour. They want to be there, they want to be a proper team, they want to be taken seriously, and I predict that they will be.
One thing that I think me and you share in common in terms of our favourite sports, when you look at me loving cricket, you loving F1 and tennis, is I think that we like a sport that is super conditions dependent and that can change from race to race or match to match. So with that in mind...
Or minute to minute.
Precisely. With that in mind, I want to ask you a question that I had started formulating in my head when I was trying to figure out what floppy team meant. And I thought you might have meant like flip-floppy team.
Oh, yeah.
So if you had to name a team that you think will see the most like divergence in performance on a weekly basis, depending on the tracks, who do you think is going to be like really up and down this season?
That's a fantastic question and really hard to answer without seeing on-track performance. If we take floppy team to mean that, then it was Mercedes were the floppy team, maybe you could say, last year. They were really quick in cold conditions, and then the hotter it got, the worse they were. But they won't be that. They'll be consistent this year, I'm sure of it. Ferrari have often been quite a floppy team recently. Who would be my guess for being the floppy team in that context? I think maybe Red Bull, from the point of view of they're going to be really quick at tracks that are energy starved, like Melbourne, where there's not a lot of slow corners and heavy braking zones. And if we believe what everyone's saying in the paddock, particularly Toto Wolff, but Red Bull didn't deny it, so there must be something there. They are able to find energy in places that other teams can't. So I think they'll be really quick at some tracks because of that, but not because their theoretical performance is good in certain conditions. It's that other teams won't be as good in certain conditions. I think they'll maintain their level, and other teams will vet. So you could see every other team other than Red Bull is the floppy team, and they'll be able to be consistent.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, but everyone else will change around them, and that will impact their finishing position.
Exactly. That again, this is very hard to guess and very hard to read. We'll see.
Well, that brings us nicely on to the final question, which just says WDC and WCC. So I'm assuming this is who's going to win the World Darts Championship next year, and who's going to end up in the water closet.
Luke Littler and you.
Okay, thank you. And then, what does this mean? Sorry.
So WDC is World Drivers' Championship.
Oh.
WCC is World Constructors' Championship, and we should
Makes
explain that so there's two championships in Formula One. One matters, and that's the Drivers' Championship, which is who is the world champion, the driver. It's Lando Norris currently, who gets the most points across the races in a season. The Constructors' Championship is actually more important from a long-term performance point of view. That is the team's championship. So both drivers compete to get points for their team in the Constructors' Championship. The higher you finish in the Constructors' Championship, the more money you get, the more prize money you get. And we're talking millions and millions and millions of pounds here. And the gap between finishing 7th and 8th can be tens of millions of pounds. I think it was £30 million. It's huge. Every place is... because it's a split of the pie. It's a split of... There's a pot, and then a percentage goes to... based on finishing position. But inversely, the team who wins the Constructors' Championship has less testing time in the wind tunnel. So if you do finish last, the uptick, the upshot is, or the positive you can spin from that is that you, when building your car for next season, will have less money to do it, but more time to do it, if that makes sense. It's an aim to try and balance it out. But if you ask every team boss, would you rather finish 4th or 5th, you'd take 30 million quid and finish 4th. It's better to have the money, especially these top teams who have the resources anyway and can do things. If Cadillac have twice as much time than Red Bull, they'll produce the same thing because Red Bull have the resources, the manpower, Cadillac don't. So that's what that means. And now our prediction is, I suppose, we could do it. You know when we 3-2-1'd?
Yeah. How could I forget?
Who was it? Floppy cricket player and...
Yeah, it was Duckett and Head, wasn't it? So you want to do that for...
WDC and WCC.
WDC first?
Yeah.
And it's 3-2-1 and then name the player?
Name the driver,
okay.
yeah.
3-2-1, George Russell.
Yes, I think everyone's favourite going into the season is George Russell. The Mercedes is expected to be the fastest car by, not an endless margin like it was in 2014, where it was literally lights out and away we go. Rosberg and Hamilton are 10 seconds ahead. Who's going to win out of those two? I don't expect that. But George Russell was, to some people, the driver of the season last season. Certainly, if not, then the second best. He's showing signs of being a world champion. He's gritty, he's determined, he isn't easily pushed out of the way. I think something that's really good about George Russell is that he's annoying and he's got needle. And he's, I think, the only driver in Formula One at the moment who both actually practically on the track and mentally can go to toe with Max Verstappen. I don't think anyone else can.
I think from an outside point of view, I think obviously Russell seems to be the only one who actually has a problem with Verstappen.
Yeah, they got on really well off the track.
Most of them love him, and it's nice to hear that they do actually get on. But I think even in the heat of battle, it seems like everyone else of this younger generation just has real adoration for Verstappen. But I often find it, to take it back to darts, actually, I often see people playing Luke Littler, and I just think, like, you're giving him so much respect. Like, Nathan Aspinall is bad for it. They're really good mates, and Stephen Bunting as well. They just look absolutely in awe of Littler when they're playing him, and they just, more often than not, they lose quite heavily. And then someone like Gowan Price, who's willing to stand up for him and doesn't act like that, beats him very consistently.
Than others, yeah.
So do you think that will help Russell actually battle Verstappen if 100%. That's going to be his closest rival?
100%. And I think the thing with Verstappen is, if he hasn't got you on track, he's got you in the head. Charles Leclerc is probably the only other driver other than George Russell that I think, in terms of wheel-to-wheel combat, is a match for Verstappen. But he hasn't got it going on up there. In 2022, there was a title battle between the two for the first half, where Ferrari came out of the blocks with the fastest overall package, and he had like a 35-point lead and started making mistakes. And every time he got on the road with Verstappen, yeah, he could battle him, but he'd make a mistake. He'd beat himself up. He'd crash. And Verstappen is metronomic. He doesn't make these mistakes. What you're hoping for is once every 20 races, he has a rage moment and goes and, bins it into someone, and gets angry and says, fuck you. That's your only hope with Verstappen. George Russell is the prime causer of those moments. And we saw it last year where Russell illegally tried to overtake Verstappen and smashed into him. Max responded by smashing him back and obviously got a penalty and fell out of the points. And in hindsight, although, this is not really true, but if you look at it from a pure mathematical point of view, cost him the championship. I don't think it really did, because McLaren took their foot off the gas because he was so far behind. So it's if buts and maybes. But anyway, George Russell stands up to Verstappen, and what Verstappen's done in Formula One, it's probably good to paint a picture of the difference he's made, is that there was a bit of a sort of lull of a few years where everyone was really respectful and everyone knew where the boundaries were, and everyone knew that when racing wheel to wheel, you give space here, you're allowed to be a bit more aggressive here, and everyone kind of had a thing. The boundary was there, and people were nudging up towards it, probably around the same degree. And then Verstappen came in and said, no, I'm going to sit on top of the boundary and sometimes go over it. And everyone else panicked and jumped out the way. What George Russell does is go, okay, you're stepping over the boundary, I'll come and join you. No one else really does that. And I think that's why he's got a really good shot at, if it's a straight fight between those two, and I think it will be, he's got a really good chance.
So you're backing him over Verstappen? That's quite big for you.
I'm backing him over Verstappen because I don't think that Verstappen is the better driver overall. He's the best driver in Formula One, and I'm biased, but every single metric will point towards that. It's kind of hard to argue that at this point. But I think Mercedes will be quicker than Red Bull. And I think that, as we kind of saw last year, Max's heroics won't quite be enough to stop George Russell in the way that I think, here's what I'd say. Red Bull will be closer to Mercedes this year than they were to McLaren last year. But I have more faith in George Russell getting the job done than Lando Norris, because Norris does not know how to race Max Verstappen. George Russell does. So in a straight fight, most people I would back Verstappen even if he had by far the slowest car, not when it's George Russell.
And then just quickly, the Constructors' Championship then.
3, 2, 1, Mercedes.
Yeah.
This is even more wrapped up for me. I think in the drivers, you can't rule out Max. Kimi Antonelli, if Mercedes are that fast, if he finds something, I think it's too soon for him, but you never know. Ferrari look quick. There's enough variables in the Drivers' Championship, but I just think that in the Constructors, Mercedes will have the edge, and every other bar McLaren, but their issue is tripping themselves up. there's a clear faster driver, right? Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, clearly the fastest in their team. Mercedes, you'd say that's the case with George Russell, but it's close enough, and Kimi Antonelli is there often enough, and was last season in his rookie year at the age of 18, to be a good benchmark, a good backup, and to score points. I think they'll comfortably win the Constructors' Championship.
Right, well, I'm already invested. I don't know about you guys, but just a little bit of housekeeping before we go about what it's going to look like from our point of view. We're in the midst of a very busy week,
It's all happening.
We've just done our cricket semi-final preview, and the semi-finals have started today. So then this will be the next episode out, of course. But then Sunday, we've got an extravaganza.
We're going to have a me and you day.
We are. It's going to be lovely, but it will involve start getting up at about 3:30 in the morning to watch the F1. And then we're also going to watch the World Cup final for the cricket. And then there'll be episodes coming out about both. And then I'm pretty sure we've already said this on air, so we'll say it again. We'll say it again that we're planning to do every race, cover every race. When that comes out might depend on what we're doing on any given Sunday, but we are planning to see this one all the way through. And to be fair, I'm excited because obviously I think cricket takes quite a natural break now from here on until the first test, because we are just going to focus on England. So it's nice to have something to do, because I wouldn't want to stop doing this with you, Jonny. Not yet. I'm not ready. So keep your eye out for lots of F1 stuff coming in the near future. And for now, we'll just say thank you very much. This was the top step. Is that what we're calling it?
Yeah, the corridor, the top step.
Yeah, and it's be the first of many. And thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Beautifully done.
Thank you.
I for the first 10 minutes, I had a bit of this is different.
Yeah.
It's a different skill.
It is a different skill.
And it took me a while to bed in with it.
I think you naturally sunk into my more introspective, slightly softer spoken
Yes.
mode.
I think, you're my blueprint for how it's done,